Episode 7 is the second in our two-part series of interviewing. James kicked us off though with walking us through every step of an interview he went through recently, which was a super interesting experience and tons to be learned from. We then went super deep into actually how to respond to interview questions. We gave like really specific tips on crafting your career stories, including examples from both of us. And then we went into actually an interview response technique called STAR, where James and I also gave you examples from our own career. So this is absolutely one not to be missed, really going to help you nail that next interview. The job market has changed since the pandemic, and so have the rules.
What worked 3 years ago no longer works. There's so much more noise out there and so much contradictory advice.
We're here to help you cut past the noise and decode the new rules.
And to guide you to your next opportunity. We're going to give you our shared expertise and help you figure out how to make the most of this post-pandemic talent market.
So join us on this journey if you're open to work. Hello, James.
Yo, 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 we're right back at it.
Right back at it. We're doing a double dipping interview storytelling bonanza double episode. Wow.
That's why we're wearing the same clothes, because it's the same day.
Right. Yeah, it's minutes apart. We've basically since just gone and I've got myself a Coke and you've got yourself some sort of fruit juice, but like special. Yeah.
Not currently sponsored by Prest, but that's something we could definitely talk about in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, would you be open to being sponsored by Coca-Cola? I don't know.
They've got a lot of money, so sure.
So what we ended last episode kind of talking a bit about interviewing and preparing and stuff like that. And I'm conscious that you've recently been through an interview process. And I just wondered if you felt comfortable like talking about your experience.
Yes, I'm totally happy to be vulnerable and talk about this because I'm sure lots of folks are going through exactly the same thing. In my line of work, heading up talent acquisition teams, there's not a ton of demand right now. And so there aren't, it's not like I'm going through multiple interview processes at the same time. And so it's even harder to follow my own advice and not get overinvested. I think what was really difficult about this process I just went through was that it was a job I really wanted in a new-ish industry. I'm going to be deliberately vague to protect the innocent because I'm going to tell the whole story. But it's a new-ish industry in a field that I'm super interested in, but also had a ton of overlap just in the breadth and depth and complexity of hiring. And so even though it's a new industry, the types of hiring worldwide that I've covered would have been a really good fit for what they were looking for. They clearly thought that too, because it was like I met every single person in the company over the course of a 3-month process that culminated in me flying down to LA for 2 days and spending a full day on site and literally meeting 12 people back to back. So it was a really grueling day, but I felt that it went as well as it could have done. And I was super invested, and the chief human resources officer was like really transparent throughout the whole process. But then after I went down to LA for the interviews, everything kind of started to get a bit weird in that the transparency continued via text message from the chief human resources officer who would have been my boss. But it'd been quite a lengthy process, but like over the 3 months or so, there'd been like regular cadences of, something happening every week. But then after I went down to LA, it started to stretch out and out and out. And even though I was getting regular text message updates, I was like, this is not looking great, because as you and I know, that old saying, time kills all deals, it's just a thing, right? Sometimes it's not true, but most of the time it is. And so it was weird because I was kind of having my grieving process before I even knew what the outcome was, just because I'd already decided for myself that this probably was not going to happen. But then super weirdly, I got like a flurry of text messages from the CHRO who realized she was at the same conference that I was and wanted to chat to me face to face. And so then I was like, oh, maybe it's not bad news, because why would we want to meet in a ballroom in Las Vegas to talk about this? But it was not good news. She told me face to face that they had decided not to go with me. But I actually wasn't crushed. I was obviously disappointed because I thought I would have been great at the job and I loved the industry. And I thought I had made a good rapport with all of the people. But because they dragged it on for so long after the interviews, I'd kind of come to my own conclusion. And I thought it was kind of wild to reject me face to face underneath the Wynn Casino in Las Vegas. That's kind of odd thing to do.
One of the most bizarre rejection stories I've ever heard in my career.
Maybe I have been in California too long, but I do firmly believe that you cannot miss anything that is intended for you. And I also believe, I genuinely believe this, you never know what the universe is protecting you from. And as disappointing as it is to not get a job, in hindsight, you always realize that it was to clear the way for something else, and that it might, getting that job might have actually caused you not to make the same money that you might be able to make, or worse, to actually put you in a situation where it might damage your physical, emotional, or mental health. And I'm not saying that any of those things would happen with that company, but there's a reason I didn't get it, and I just have to be okay with that. And I genuinely am. And I don't know whether that's because I spent a lot of time in therapy, or because I've been doing this job for 20 years, or because I've been talking about it a lot. But I guess the message I want people to hear is that even when you're really invested in something and you really want it, you might not get it. And that doesn't mean that you're not a great person, a great employee. It just means that this wasn't the thing, and the next thing will come.
And I think everyone, hopefully who's listening to this, well, hopefully not everyone, but I think almost everyone will have been able to kind of feel a kind of a similar experience to this. And we all have our kind of own version of a story that's an equivalent to like went through process, was really positive, had really awful, like inconsistent or like weird feedback experience, and had to process that interaction and kind of go through that. And I think the reason why it's really useful I hope that people take away solace in hearing someone of your stature and experience tell that story, because I don't think our rejection stories from interview processes is something that people really talk about publicly a lot, for all of the reasons why I think we've started to talk about through this series. And hopefully we can create and support people in creating spaces to be more vulnerable and to talk more openly about their rejection experiences, because they do have an impact and they do take it on. I remember being a friend of yours throughout that process and supporting you and coaching you through that. And, it's important. And I'm really, and you've done the same for me. And I think it's really important to have those people around you who can cheerlead for you when you need it. And this isn't a moment, just like a breakup, where you do need it.
100%. It's all part of the human experience. And the reason I can talk about it so candidly now, and hopefully people can hear in my voice and see in my face that I'm genuinely okay. I was not genuinely okay at points throughout that 3 and 4 month journey, whatever it was in total. There were some really low moments, and being able to talk to you and other folks about what I was experiencing in the moment helped me process that. And so now that's why I can look back at the whole process and be relatively upbeat about it, even though I didn't get the outcome that I thought I wanted. By going through the journey and feeling my feelings and talking about them with you and others allows me to process it and move on. It is tough, and you will have low moments, and that is okay. It is normal. It is human. And the best thing you can do is talk about it.
Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained, and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all. In my experience, and you'd love to hear your perspective on this, but most interviews start with some sort of format of, and I, whether or not you think they should or not is a whole other thing. But most interviews start with some sort of setup, like tell me a bit about yourself, or like walk me through your CV briefly, or walk me through your background. They're asking for some sort of career summary. Would you say that's pretty accurate from your experience?
happens 95% of the time.
Yeah.
And whether it happens or not, one of the best bits of preparation you can do is get a really tight, crafted 90-second to 2-minute summary of your own career journey. What you really want to be doing is bringing your resume to life, walking people through what you did, why you made the decisions you made, from changing from company A to company B, and also just really hitting on the key highlights of your career. And by practicing it ahead of time, it allows you to ensure you're capturing all the best moments, number one. And number two, it also gives you the opportunity to control the narrative. And what I mean by that is careers are not linear. No one's career is linear. Mine isn't either. And there are also bumps in the road that happen, and they're neither good, bad, nor indifferent. But getting out ahead of those bumps in the road is really powerful. And so if you were laid off, if you decided to take a year off to go traveling, whatever it is, actually preempting the questions and addressing, after job X, I went traveling for 6 months, and here's the reasons I did it, and here's what I learned. And then when I came back, I joined company Y. Like, preempting the question, it's what do we say in sales? Like you're getting rid of the objection. What's the phrase?
Objection handling, pre-objection handling, or something.
That's the one.
Yeah. I think about the story this in a couple of different ways. Firstly, it's a literal open goal to sell yourself. And it should be a really as you've said, a really well-crafted story that really leads breadcrumbs and can immediately show within the first 2 to 3 minutes of an interview that you're someone who's worth taking seriously, and this is going to be a really impactful conversation. Where I've seen this done poorly is stories that are too long. If your story is definitely if it's crossing 5, but probably if it's crossing 3 minutes, you have gone on too long. And the reason, and partly why it's important, is because they will probably have very specific things they want to ask you. And if you're continuing to go on about every single element of your career, you're probably telling them things they actually have no interest in learning about, because they had very specific things they wanted to learn about your career. So having a structured and tight, 90 seconds to 2 minutes, where you can, lead some breadcrumbs of really interesting things and get that, high level of engagement early in a conversation, will set up the rest of the conversation to be so much better, because you're starting to feed into their confirmation bias. It's a reality that biases are part of everyone's decision making in this world. And so if you can understand that and own it potentially as an interviewee, you can say, well, look, I know that they're going to probably make a big chunk of the decision in the first 2 minutes. Let me take control of that decision and have a very good story so that they are taking me seriously, and then hopefully continuing to confirm and enable those kind of parts of my background and that excitement that they felt when I gave them that pitch. And I think another connection to that is, if you, I kind of always say you want to drop some really critical and exciting breadcrumbs so that they can come back to it. So you're not trying to tell everyone the whole story, but you are trying to tell someone the part of the story that they can come back to and start to make assumptions about your career. Most of what happens in an interview, in my opinion, most of the decisions that get made in an interview come from what isn't said. Right, it's the assumptions that people make because of the context that you've given them and because of the little bits of information that you've given them. And they start to piece together a story in their head about what you're like. And so when we talk about controlling the narrative earlier, you're absolutely right. And don't give them too big of a gap to make up their own assumption that you're not comfortable with. I've been rejected more from interviews in my career, and I've seen more rejections happen because they didn't talk about a topic than they did talk about a topic that wasn't answered in the right way.
100%.
James, tell us about our American sponsor.
Many of the legacy ATS products don't use AI in any meaningful way, which is what is so innovative about Mojo Hire.ai. It is an overlay that you can add to your existing ATS that helps you better discover candidates that are already there and reduces discovery time by up to 90%. Their comparative AI tool is a real game changer, and you can learn more at mojohire.ai.
Should we have a go? Do you want to give people an example of your career story in 2 minutes, and I can even look at the timer here and time me, and then you can give me a go.
So I always start by saying I've been doing this a long time, 20 years, but I kind of view my career in two neat decades. I was super fortunate in the first decade of my career to join, back then, we didn't call them unicorns or rocket ships because it was 20 years ago, but that's exactly what it turned out to be. I joined a small digital business in London that at the time had fewer than 200 employees and less than $40 million of revenue. And when I left nearly a decade later, we'd crossed $1 billion in revenue and achieved a $5 billion valuation. So all of the amazing things that you would want to happen in a startup happened. And I was super fortunate to be able to grow with the organization. I joined as the first in-house recruiter and was able to establish the internal recruiting function, roll out the first ATS, roll out the second ATS, open our offices and tech development centers and facilities around the world. And by the time I left, I had recruiting teams, very large recruiting team in London, but also teams in Hong Kong, Shanghai, and New York. And I firmly believe that everything that happened in that first decade enabled me to make the transition into my second decade and where I've been in quote unquote corporate America for the last 10 years. If it hadn't been for the complexity and breadth of the role in the startup, I wouldn't have been able to navigate the very complex roles that I've held, leading global recruitment teams, initially at initially at Levi's in Europe, ultimately being promoted to the head of recruiting for Levi's worldwide in San Francisco. And then most recently, I led global talent acquisition for all of Nike's consumer businesses worldwide. So we had a team of 100 recruiters spread around the world that were hiring in an average year 40,000 people. Both my previous jobs have been in highly regulated environments because both Nike and Levi's are federal contractors. So I'm used to complex cross-border recruiting, multilingual recruiting, and a highly regulated environment.
So I started my career in executive search. So I was from kind of a very early stage of my career, hiring C-suite and C-suite leaders across Europe. I then moved into the tech sector where I started to do this across companies in Europe, super fast growing companies in Europe. And then I moved to Australia where I became our firm's youngest ever partner, expanding super fast growing businesses across continental Australasia, I guess. I then moved and took on my first role in-house, which was a super awesome experience for me. I'd never done in-house talent acquisition before. I then ended up taking over the entire people function for that business. It was a fintech called RateSetter, which then turned its name into Plenty. And I ended up getting them ready for their public offering the year after I left. I then moved back to the UK with a company called CultureAmp, which is an employee engagement surveying tool. I ran all of their European recruitment and also their go-to-market recruiting from the States. Critically there, I kind of managed them through their COVID downsizing and then re-upsizing and regrowth of that team and a lot of kind of really critical processes for diversity and inclusion following the murder of George Floyd, which was a really, really passionate, thing that was something I'm really passionate about. I then moved to join one of Europe's fastest growing startups called Zap. I joined them at 100 people as the director of recruiting. I scaled them to well over 1,000 while I was there in under 12 months, scaled the team from 5 to over 30. We were hiring hundreds of people a month across our corporate teams, but then also we were doing a super high volume hiring, for our store staff and our operational kind of engine, basically. With the downsizing of that sort of sector, I then moved into a business called Procore, which was a $1 billion revenue, publicly traded business, does a market cap of about $10 billion and about 5,000 employees. And I was hired to expand their non-US segment. So it was just 2 countries, the UK and Australia when I joined, about 100 people in each, so about 200 in total. I was managing a team of 2. I scaled them to over 600 people across 7 countries. And had a team of 15. I was laid off. Went through reduction in force there at the end of last year, and have been since kind of actively looking for my next role. I love solving problems. That's what I do best. I go into kind of ambiguous environments, either big or small, and help them solve problems sometimes that they didn't already know they have. That ultimately kind of are enabling business success through people and talent needs.
I'd hire you.
We have, sort of. We're doing this.
Well, yeah. There you go. It worked.
Yeah, exactly. So I think when I haven't written down that formally. I've done like lots of different iterations of it through my time. But how I think about it, and maybe you can give me feedback on it, is I want to drop in and very early that I was in executive search. I think it's a really important part of my career, something I do really well. And I think it's a differentiator because I did executive search is a style of recruiting that I did very early in my career. But then also that I've seen, actually what I didn't include here is that I think what's unique, something that is unique about my career, that I've done early stage business all the way through to publicly listed, and I've gone through that journey of growth. And that's the value that I think I can bring to companies. And that I think is definitely something I didn't include here, but it's something that I try and get into every single business because I recognize that it's a unique selling point of mine.
And so let's turn this into action points for the listeners. What we both try to do is frame our experience and our journey in the context of where it was. So either the growth of the organizations that we were part of, or the scale of the organizations that we were part of, or the complexity of the organizations we were part of. So talking about what we did, executive search, leading recruiting, what have you, yes, but also in what context, in hypergrowth, in cross-border. And so whatever your experience is, that's what you need to be thinking about, what your narrative is. What did you do? Where did you do it? And what are the unique differentiators of that story that you want to highlight and call out that are memorable or noteworthy?
Yeah. And I think that leads us nicely into this, into like how you would respond to any other sort of kind of interview question, I guess. And there's a lot of writing online. I would definitely recommend, I think I've written about it individually, and then there's also broadly lots of writing about this online about the STAR format or the CAR format. And I think it's important to talk about like how do you respond to a question that is asking you to talk about, share an example of something from your experience. And almost even with a bad interviewer, it's very likely that they'll ask you to share a story about your past as an indicator of whether or not you could do that in the future. That's what a behavioral interviewing question is. That's what they call it. And so when we talk about the STAR response, this is called situation, task, action, result. And then you can also add an extra R that's reflection. And that's an approach that is really widely used. A simpler version of this is CAR, which is context, action, result. So why don't I just walk through like the outline of what STAR really means, and then I think context, action, result can speak for itself a little bit, and then we can maybe go through like some sort of an example. But ultimately, what these two frameworks do is enable you to tell really structured and clear stories that demonstrate the overall impact of what you were doing. So STAR, situation. What was the situation when I joined? This is like setting in inverted commas the context. We're looking for what was the size of the business, how many employees was it, what was the revenue and turnover when you joined, what was the general, like how big was your team when you joined? Like this is like thinking back to the start of the story, what was the context and what was the situation you found yourself in? T is the task. So what was it that you were tasked with doing when you were in that situation, I guess? So this doesn't have to be at the start of the role, but often when you join a new company, that's when you have a really clear task because you probably were hired to do something specific. So if you don't have a really clear vision of like what you've been doing for the last few years, try and go back to like, what is it that you were hired to do? What is the impact that you're being paid for on the business? And typically this falls into one of two categories. It's either you were generating revenue or you're reducing costs. You are almost certainly impacting one of those two things. Otherwise, it's unlikely. You were impacting one of those two things one way or another. And so try and think about your task relative to one of those two elements. Then you have the action. So what is it that you did to achieve against that task? What is it that you did? What actions did you take? So this will be the specific deliverables of and actions, like you improved a process, it's the core of the story really of what you actually delivered. And then the result is, what is the impact? How do you measure what the impact of that action was? When you think back to the task and the situation, how did you impact that task and situation when you, as a result of your actions? It's really important to get the R included. Otherwise the entire story doesn't have an ending. The added extra, which is reflection, is if you were to do this again, reflecting back on it, like what would you do differently? How do you reflect and engage with how do you reflect on the experience that you went through? Because it shows a level of kind of self-awareness and curiosity and idea and kind of mentality of wanting to improve.
Yeah, I'm gonna answer it in a slightly different way and talk about a brand new stakeholder to the business that we had to engage with, just because it's a really good story.
Great.
So back in 2019, pre-pandemic, the before times, at Levi's, we hired a chief data scientist and information officer. And which was kind of counterintuitive for a 160-year-old legacy business, but we were going all in on data science. And so we hired Katya, who joined us from a large telco in Europe. She now leads all of the data science research at Harvard Business School. She really knows a lot about data science. And so she arrived in San Francisco, our global headquarters, ready to build a brand new organization. So straight out the gate, we needed to hire hundreds of data scientists, data analysts, and machine learning engineers. Levi's is headquartered in San Francisco. San Francisco is 12 miles from Silicon Valley, where the highest density of data scientists in the world live and work. It is also where there is the highest level of competition for data scientists. And so for my first meeting with Katya and with the team that were going to be supporting her, I obviously went to her with some research of what the total addressable market looked like. And one of the things I showed Katya was not just the talent density for the three key job titles we needed to hire, like data scientist, ML engineer, what have you. Not just what the talent density was, but also what the median cost was, and most crucially, what the talent movements had been like. And what was key in this is, yes, there was the highest density of what we needed in our own backyard. But in 2019, fully 90% of those people doing that job in Silicon Valley had changed jobs within the last 12 months. So what that told us is that there's huge competition for these people in this location, and they're therefore pushing up the price of these people and making it highly unlikely that if 90% of the people we were going after had already changed jobs within the last year, that they would be willing to change jobs again. So my proposal to Katya was, we can absolutely try and hire in San Francisco, but we are going to face considerable barriers, price barriers, and just mobility barriers. Is going to be a lot more inertia. So what we can also do is look at where else in the world do we have operations and offices, and where else in the world is there overlap with the types of people that we're looking for. And this was obviously pre-pandemic, so like remote and distributed work wasn't such a thing yet, but Katya loved this idea and loved it so much that she wanted to go a step further and actually hire people where we didn't have operations yet. And so we had to compromise, because actually for a global risk-averse business, hiring people in places where you don't have operations, where you don't have tax agreements, where you don't have payroll, it's just difficult and challenging. And so we settled on the middle course that actually we're going to hire people in Lisbon, in Singapore, where there is a density of what we're looking for and where we already have operations. And actually that proved to be a really successful strategy, in that we were able to meet our hiring goals by hiring globally straight out of the gate, rather than trying to just hire in our own backyard where we knew we would face significant competition.
Yeah, I like that. I think the S and the T was set up like quite nicely with the goal of the business and wanting to. I think you could have even taken it a whole other level more. And why did the business want to hire, like, build this data analytics team? What was going to be the broader impact to the business? I think, especially like at a VP level, understanding how it all ties back into that senior, the overall outcomes for the company can just be so powerful. And knowing that, and I was like really hoping at the end that you back with the result, which you did in the end. You ended up achieving the hiring goals. It would have been 5% better if you'd been able to say, and we hired 100 people across, in XYZ period of time as a result. That would have made it a little bit sweeter. But again, it was a really clear situation, task, action, result. If I was an interviewer, my next question would be, what would you do differently next time, and how would you engage with it? But we won't go through that today.
100%. I think, I don't want to belabor the point, but I think we've made it quite clear that interviews are totally subjective, and there are so many variables beyond your control that it's not worth, self-analyzing if you did or didn't get it, because so much of it is completely random. But what is in your control is crafting your narratives so that when you have the opportunity to tell stories, you're telling the best stories that you can. And then you've just got to hope that everything else falls into place. But there are core things that you can do in your preparation that will just help you be more confident when you get the opportunity to lay up your stories.
Exactly. And on that note, I think, that's a lot of hopefully a very useful information and lots of examples. And hopefully you also got to learn a little bit more about us in this. As always, we're here to help. Hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully it's going to help you better prepare and better be even more ready for an interview than you would have been before. If you feel like that is helping you, hit subscribe, follow us for next week, and also share it with your friends who are potentially preparing for their interviews and where these tips would be helpful. Anywhere around the world, this sort of stuff is going to be helping people prepare and get their next job. And we want to be there along by your side, helping you. So please like, subscribe, share. And if you have any questions about anything we've discussed here today, write in. Share your star stories with us. It's opentoworkpod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.